The Xel'Thar fleet moved through the dark void of space, their massive warships blocking out the stars. Their technology was thousands of years ahead of anything humans had ever seen. They had crushed countless civilizations before. Earth was just another target. High Commander Vrexus stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Tyrant's Wrath. His cold, reptilian eyes studied the blue planet below. Reports from his spies said that humans were weak. Their weapons were outdated. Their armies were divided. This would be easy. "Commander," said one of his officers, "we are entering Earth's orbit. No resistance detected." Vrexus let out a deep, guttural laugh. "Pathetic," he muttered. Most planets panicked when the Xel'Thar arrived. Some begged for mercy. Others tried to fight and failed. But Earth was silent. No warning alarms, no defensive shields, not even a single missile fired into space. It was almost too easy. Vrexus turned to his second-in-command, a warrior named Xel'Thar. "Send the first wave. I want this planet under our control before the next cycle." Xel'Thar nodded and pressed a button on the console. Within seconds, hundreds of attack ships detached from the main fleet, diving through Earth's atmosphere like falling meteors. Their mission was simple: land in major cities, disable all military forces, and force the humans to surrender. The first ships touched down in New York, London, Tokyo, and Moscow. Their armored troops stepped out, weapons ready, but something was wrong. The streets were empty. No cars moved. No people ran. No soldiers defended their land. The mighty cities of Earth were dead silent. Xel'Thar frowned as he watched the live footage from the landing teams. Where are the humans? A deep unease settled in the commander's chest. This wasn't how invasions worked. This wasn't normal. Back on the flagship, Vrexus narrowed his eyes. "Send scouting drones. I want answers." The drones launched, scanning the empty streets, searching for life signs. They flew over abandoned skyscrapers, through silent homes, past deserted markets. The whole planet felt wrong. Then the first report came in. "Commander," an officer shouted, "something is." The screen cut to static. More alerts flashed. One by one, the landing teams went silent. Their signals disappeared. No explosions, no gunfire, just nothing. A chill ran through Vrexus's body. This wasn't a surrender. This was something else. He had underestimated humans, and he was about to regret it. On the bridge of the Tyrant's Wrath, silence filled the air. High Commander Vrexus stared at the flickering screens. His troops had landed, but they were gone. No distress calls, no reports, just static. "This doesn't make sense," Xel'Thar muttered. "The humans should be begging for mercy by now." Vrexus clenched his jaw. "Send another wave. Full battalions. Arm them with anti-personnel drones and thermal scanners. I want to know what happened." Within minutes, thousands of heavily armed Xel'Thar troops were deployed. They landed in the empty cities, moving through the silent streets. Their scanners picked up heat signatures, but the readings were strange, flickering, moving too fast. Then the first soldier screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was pure terror. His helmet camera showed a shadow rushing toward him. The screen cut to static before anyone could see what it was. More soldiers vanished, one by one. "Something is hunting us," Xel'Thar whispered. Vrexus' hands tightened into fists. "Impossible. The humans are weak." But the screens told a different story. That Xel'Thar were being wiped out. Then a new message appeared on the main screen. It was a transmission from Earth. A human figure stood in the shadows, face hidden. His voice was calm, but there was something chilling about it. "You should not have come here." The transmission cut. For the first time in his life, Vrexus felt fear. High Commander Vrexus stood frozen, his reptilian fingers gripping the edges of his command console. The human's voice echoed in his mind. "You should not have come here." "What was that?" Xel'Thar asked, his voice tight with unease. Vrexus forced himself to remain calm. "A bluff," he growled. "Humans are primitive. They cannot." "BEP, BEP, BEP." Alarms blared. The ship's AI projected a holographic display of the planet. A surge of energy pulsed across Earth's surface. A second later, an entire section of the Xel'Thar fleet vanished. No explosions, no impact. They just disappeared, an officer stammered. Vrexus' tail twitched in agitation. Impossible. Down on Earth, the remaining Xel'Thar forces were in chaos. Their soldiers ran through the empty streets, weapons ready, but no enemy was in sight. Their own shadows stretched unnaturally under the dim, flickering lights. Some swore they saw figures moving just out of reach, but scanners detected nothing. Then the streetlights cut out. Darkness. The Xel'Thar activated their night vision, but something moved faster than their eyes could track. A soldier screamed. His body was dragged into the shadows, gone in an instant. Another fired his weapon wildly, but hit nothing. The Xel'Thar were not the hunters anymore. Back on the flagship, Vrexus watched in horror as squad after squad vanished from the monitors. Then another message appeared on the main screen. A human stood in front of a captured Xel'Thar soldier. The alien was on his knees, trembling. The human spoke again, his voice calm, emotionless. "We wanted peace. You brought war." The Xel'Thar soldier let out a final, terrified screech before the screen cut to black. Vrexus' blood ran cold. This wasn't an invasion. It was an execution. High Commander Vrexus stood rigid on the bridge of the Tyrant's Wrath. The silence in the room was suffocating. His officers watched the blackened screen in disbelief. A Xel'Thar warrior, one of their best, had been reduced to nothing but a frightened, helpless creature before being taken. This was wrong. The Xel'Thar were conquerors. They had crushed countless species. No one had ever resisted them like this. No one had ever hunted them back. Vrexus exhaled slowly, forcing down the tension in his chest. "We need more information," he growled. "Send in the war drones, maximum firepower. Eradicate anything that moves." Clive hesitated, his scales darkened with unease. "Commander, I don't think this is a war." He turned, his voice dropping. "It's a trap." Vrexus snapped his head toward his officer. "Then we crush the trap," he snarled. "Humans are flesh and bone. We have weapons that turn planets to dust." Clive didn't argue, but something in his posture showed doubt. Within moments, thousands of war drones deployed from the mothership, descending into Earth's atmosphere like a mechanical storm. These machines had wiped out entire civilizations. They could detect anything that breathed, hide in the shadows, and adapt to enemy tactics. This would be the end of the human resistance. Also, Vrexus thought. On the ground, the drones landed in formation, scanning the streets. The towering ruins of human cities stood silent, dark, as if watching. Their sensors flickered. Movement detected. Something darted between the buildings. Fast, precise. The drones locked onto the heat signatures and opened fire. Explosions rocked the streets, but when the smoke cleared, nothing. The targets had vanished. Then, one by one, the drone's signals cut out. Vrexus watched the monitors in growing horror. The camera feeds flickered with glimpses of something moving. Too fast to process, too coordinated to be untrained resistance. Then, a new image appeared on the screen. A human stood in the ruins, staring directly into the drone's lens. He wasn't afraid. His eyes were cold, calculating. Then he smiled. Before Vrexus could react, the drone's feed was hijacked, its system overridden. A message appeared across every Xel'Thar screen. 3 words: "Welcome to hell." And then the drones turned against their own fleet. The bridge of the Tyrant's Wrath was in chaos. Red warning lights flashed, and alarms blared through the command center. Officers shouted over one another, desperately trying to regain control. High Commander Vrexus stood motionless, staring at the screens. His war drones, his perfect machines, had betrayed him. How is this possible?" Clive whispered. Vrexus didn't answer. His mind raced. The humans had no technology capable of hacking Xel'Thar systems. Their primitive weapons couldn't even penetrate a warship's shields. And yet, the drones, his army, had turned against him. This wasn't war. This was humiliation. "Shut them down." Vrexus roared. "Override their systems." "Commander, we can't," a technician stammered. "The drones are completely cut off from our control." Clive's claws tightened against the console. Then, who is controlling them? The answer came before anyone could speak. The drones turned their weapons upward. Hundreds of them fired at the sky, targeting the Xel'Thar warships hovering over Earth. Energy blasts streaked into the darkness, slamming into the fleet's lower hulls. Shields flickered, armor melted. "Retreat! Pull the fleet back!" An officer screamed. It was too late. One of the Xel'Thar battleships took a direct hit to its reactor core. Fire erupted from its engines. The mighty warship, once a symbol of unstoppable power, began to fall. Through the viewing screens, Vrexus watched in horror as it plunged toward Earth, burning like a dying star. Then it collided with the surface, sending out a shockwave that shattered the land. For the first time in his life, Vrexus felt something alien to him. Panic. On the ground, the humans watched as the first Xel'Thar warship crashed. One of them, standing atop a ruined skyscraper, lowered his binoculars and smirked. Beside him, a woman in a tattered military uniform, her face streaked with dirt, gripped her rifle. "One down," she muttered. "A dozen more to go." The man exhaled, his breath visible in the cold night air. "They thought we were weak," he said quietly. He glanced at the others behind him. Survivors, soldiers, hackers, engineers, humans. They thought wrong. Behind him, a massive EMP device hummed to life. The final phase of their plan was beginning. Back in orbit, Vrexus could do nothing but watch his fleet start to fall, one ship at a time. And for the first time, he realized, this was not their invasion. This was their execution. Vrexus had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not just survivors. They were something far worse. High Commander Vrexus watched in horror as another warship was torn apart in Earth's atmosphere. The wreckage fell like burning meteors, illuminating the darkness below. His once mighty fleet, the same fleet that had crushed countless civilizations, was being hunted down by humans. "Pull the ships back," he roared. "Regroup at the outer orbit." The officers scrambled to obey, but the fleet was in chaos. The war drones, now controlled by the enemy, continued their relentless assault. They weren't just attacking at random, they were striking at weak points. Reactor cores, weapons arrays, shield generators. They knew exactly where to hit. Clyde's voice was shaky. "Commander, they have our tactical data. They're using it against us." Vrexus' blood ran cold. That was impossible. Unless the transmission. The human who had appeared on the screen. The moment he hacked into their system, he must have done more than just send a message. He had stolen their fleet's entire battle strategy. A sharp alarm blared through the bridge. "Commander," an officer cried, "a massive EMP surge is coming from the surface. If it reaches us..." The screens flickered. Then, all at once, blackout. On the ground, the human leader, his face still hidden in the shadows, watched from a makeshift control center inside an abandoned bunker. His people were gathered around him, monitoring the battle. A soldier beside him smiled. It worked. The massive EMP strike surged through the sky, shutting down everything. Xel'Thar ships lost power. Their weapons stopped working. Their shields collapsed. Their engines failed. And then, the final attack began. From hidden underground bunkers, human aircraft launched into the sky. Old, outdated fighter jets, built decades ago, now modified with stolen alien technology. They streaked upward, leaving trails of fire. They weren't trying to fight the fleet anymore. They were finishing it. Back in orbit, Vrexus' claws dug into the metal railing as the bridge plunged into darkness. All across his fleet, the Xel'Thar screamed in panic. The mighty warships were now floating, powerless husks. A deep, cold realization settled over them. They had never been the hunters. They had been baited into a war they had already lost before it began. The humans had not just survived. They had adapted. They had learned. And now, they were winning. Vrexus clenched his fists. "We need to retreat. Now." But as he shouted, he noticed something. The human's transmission was back on the screen. The same man. The same calm, cold voice. He leaned forward slightly, staring directly at Vrexus. "You don't get to leave." Vrexus' heart slammed against his ribs. Then the first human missiles struck. Explosions ripped through the Xel'Thar fleet. The powerless warships, now nothing more than floating coffins, were torn apart by human missiles. Fire and debris filled the void. On the bridge of the Tyrant's Wrath, High Commander Vrexus felt helpless for the first time in his life. His once invincible fleet was being dismantled like prey caught in a hunter's trap. This was not war. This was extermination. "Commander, our engines are down." An officer cried, his voice shaking. "Shields offline. We have no weapons." Clyde's claws trembled as he turned to Vrexus. "We have to surrender." Vrexus' reptilian eyes burned with rage. "The Xel'Thar do not surrender," he snarled. But deep down, he knew the truth. They had lost. A new transmission appeared on the flickering screens. The human leader. For the first time, his face was fully visible. No fear, no hatred, only cold, calculated purpose. He spoke. "We watched as you destroyed other worlds. We heard their screams." Vrex's claws tightened. "You thought we were weak." Outside, more warships exploded one after another. The wreckage of the Xel'Thar armada rained down on Earth like falling stars. But you forgot one thing about humans. The man leaned closer to the camera. "We learn from our enemies." Then silence. The screen cut to black. And in that moment, the remaining human ships launched their final strike. On the ground, from the ruins of their cities, human survivors watched the sky burn. A woman, her uniform torn and blood-stained, let out a breath. "It's over," she whispered. Beside her, a soldier gripped his rifle, staring at the destruction above. "No," he muttered. "It's just beginning." Back in orbit, the Tyrant's wrath shook violently as the final missiles hit. Fire erupted across its hull. Vrexis stumbled forward, gripping the control panel. Smoke filled the bridge. The ship was dying. He looked at the destruction outside. The mighty Xel'Thar fleet, gone. And then, in his final moment, he understood. The humans had not just won. They had made sure that Xel'Thar would never threaten another world again. As the flames consumed the bridge, Vrexis let out a single bitter whisper. "We were the fools." Epilogue. Weeks later, deep in the wreckage of the last Xel'Thar ship, human engineers recovered a single distress signal. A warning sent to the rest of the galaxy. A message burned into history. Do not underestimate Earth. Humanity does not fall. Humanity fights back. HFY Cosmic.